Afternoon, folks. Hope you're all well and self-isolating healthily. Today we're looking at Psalm number 4, Psalm 4, and it's quite a short psalm, so I'm just going to read it for you and then get into it a wee bit. So, Psalm 4, verse 1. Answer me when I call, O God of my righteousness. You have given me relief when I was in distress. Be gracious to me and hear my prayer. O men, how shall my honour be turned into shame? How long will you love vain words and seek after lies? But know that the Lord has set apart the godly for himself. The Lord hears when I call to him. Be angry and do not sin. Ponder in your own hearts on your beds and be silent. Offer right sacrifices and put your trust in the Lord. There are many who say, who will show us some good? Lift up your light of your face upon us. O Lord, you have put more joy in my heart than they have when their grain and wine abound. In peace I will both lie down and sleep, for you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. It's a great passage, and I'm just going to begin with a little quote from J.I. Packer to give you something to think about as I go through the rest of the psalm. So it's from his book, Knowing God. I'm sure many of you have read it. And it says this. Packer writes, "It is often the case, as all the saints know, that fellowship with the Father and the Son is most vivid and sweet, and Christian joy the greatest, when the cross is heaviest. Packer then suggests two ways of handling the trials of life when we cannot for the moment see God's purpose in them. He says, first, by taking them as from God and asking ourselves what reactions to them and in them the gospel of God requires of us. And secondly, by seeking God's face specifically about them. If we do these two things, we shall never find ourselves wholly in the dark as to God's purpose in troubles." Now, the entire psalm is a psalm of confidence and trust that David has in the Lord. He begins by asking, "Answer me when I call, O God of my righteousness. You have given me relief when I'm in distress. Be gracious to me and hear my prayer." His answer is not one of anxiety or anguish or despair or lack of confidence in God answering it, because the very next line, "You have given me relief when I was in distress," refers to things that have happened in the past. He knows that God will help. And so he confidently says, "You have given me relief when I was in distress. Be gracious to me and hear my prayer." He then contrasts that confidence with what men have been doing, or what his situation is, the kind of trouble that he's in, the context of life as he finds it at the time. And then he goes on in verse 3 and confidently says again, "The Lord hears when I call to him." So he begins by confidently saying, "You've helped me in the past." He continues by confidently saying, "He hears me when I call." He then goes to the faithful and he says to the faithful, "Be angry and do not sin. Ponder in your own hearts on your beds and be silent." So what's he doing there? Well, it's only natural in times of distress that we get angry. Now, sometimes we get angry with God, sometimes we get angry with the situation because it doesn't quickly resolve itself. We get angry. And what he's saying to them is, in your anger, don't be tempted to sin. If you remember in Psalm 2, it was all about understanding God's righteousness, understanding that God is there to help us, to be respected, and to be someone that we should be in awe of. So he said, do not be angry and do not sin, because there's a kind of little warning in there that says, being angry with God is, something that you really need to consider, given that God is our judge. God is our judge. Do we really want an angry God? What's it worth being angry with God and the things that are going on, or to anger a God because you're continuing to sin? So there's a question there, and he acknowledges the question, because he then says in the remainder of verse 4, ponder in your own hearts on your beds and be silent. In other words, take this anger within, present it to God, and pray about it. Pray about it. And then at the end of verse 5, he says, and put your trust in the Lord. In other words, as you're pondering, trust the God who's already answered my prayers, who I know hears my prayers, who I know is listening to me. Trust the Lord. Trust the Lord. He then goes on to acknowledge that, of course, many will be saying, as it says in verse 6, who will show us some good? And he answers it, because it's kind of a rhetorical question as well, because he says, look, lift up. It is the Lord who lifts his face up to us. And then he says this, and it's a wonderful thing. It's the one verse actually that really kind of got me. You have put more joy in my heart than they have when their grain and wine abound. In other words, there's so much joy from Jesus, and from knowing Jesus, from knowing God. The joy that David has received in his heart is more than money can buy, more than that they have when their grain and wine abound. More than money can buy, more than possessions can deliver, more joy in simply knowing that the Lord loves us and hears our prayers and answers our prayers and understands our anxieties and understands our worries. There's more joy in all of that than money can possibly buy. And he's poking a finger directly, so to speak, at the priorities of the people at the time. What are your priorities? The joy of the Lord, or a foolish attempt to relentlessly try and solve these problems yourselves simply by what you have, the possessions you have, or the money in your bank? And suddenly, I suppose, in our current situation, we're realizing that things aren't as important as the love of Jesus in our lives. That our ability to control events is really beyond our control. That we have to acknowledge a sovereign Lord, that we have to take time to, as he says in verse 4, ponder in your own hearts on your beds and be silent. We have to take time to consider what are the priorities in our lives. And David's priority is, well, it's incredibly straightforward. Verse 9, in peace I will both lie down and sleep. For you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. He knows where his safety is. He knows where he is safe. He is safe with the Lord. What about you? Amen.